Good morning, everyone.
This
This
is
is
Bill
Bill
Helmich
from
from Bill
Helmich
Helmich Associates.
Welcome to our Q&A town hall on Federal Program Administration, where you have an opportunity to ask any questions that you might think of that relate to Federal Program Management and the laws and regulations that apply to your programs, and also how the COVID-19 issue is impacting your programs, and questions that you might have in reference to how COVID-19 can be addressed. As you log on, there will be a subscribe button. Please click that. If you have any questions that you would like to submit, on the right-hand side of your screen, there's a chat, and type in your questions. Give us your name and where you're from, and give us the question, and when we come to a break point, we'll go ahead and respond to that question. We already have a bunch of questions that were submitted in advance. We'll start out with some of those as allowing the rest of you to come online, and then we'll start working through some of these questions that you submit as well. First, let me do a little bit of background about Bill Helmich Associates, then a little bit of my background, and then we'll start looking at some of the questions that you might have, or that we already have. Bill Helmich Associates has been in existence now since January of 1989. We've been providing training services to tribes, and we've been doing it in three formats in the past. What we've been doing is what we call public training sessions, where we announce seminars that we offer throughout the United States on a public subscription basis. Of course, that's been shut down, as you all well know, with the COVID-19 impact. In addition, we also offer as well what we call on-site training opportunities, where we come to you in response to a question that you and a topic that you have asked us to address. The pros and cons between the two different formats: public classes normally will have individuals from multiple reservations throughout the United States, and therefore you will have different perspectives on the issue that we have chosen. Unfortunately, the public classes also mean you are incurring travel costs to go to the public class. The on-sites allow you to tailor the materials to your organization and to address information which is specific to you, issues that you are facing. The third topic or third modality that we've been using in the past is we've been offering what we call technical assistance or consulting services, where you ask us to edit, critique, revise, comment on some of your policy manuals. And we've done this with 30 or 40 tribes and perhaps about 100 different policies throughout the United States. Obviously now, with the lockdown situation that we're presently facing, we are now adding into our, let's say, repertoire the opportunity to do live streaming, and this is the fourth in our live streaming, or fifth in our live streaming presentations that we've done so far. We hope to be doing some more. We will probably, if the lockdown continues, offer online seminars for you as well at some point in time. Okay, a little bit of my background. I was born in Wyoming, just off the Wind River Reservation, and I grew up on the Yakima Reservation in Washington State. Graduated from Wapato High School. Just a little bit of trivia for you. Wapato is a Nez Perce word that means potato. The Yakima Valley is one of the major horticultural areas in the United States, and at one time potatoes were one of the products. And I can remember sacking and piling potatoes in a railroad car in the middle of the summertime. Anyway, after I graduated high school, I got an appointment to the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs. My ambition at that time was to become a fighter pilot, and then the long-term goal was to become an astronaut. Unfortunately, the Air Force had a sitting height requirement to get into pilot training, and it turned out that I was too tall sitting down. So I guess they were afraid that if you had to eject, that it wouldn't be a safe ejection. So after graduation from the academy, went to graduate school in California for a year. Upon completion, I got assigned to Kirtland Air Force Base in Albuquerque, New Mexico, to the Air Force Weapons Lab, where I did what we now call Star Wars research type activities. And one of the things that I got involved in was a couple of research contracts which got me involved in federal contract law. So did that for about 5.5 years, got out of the service, went back to graduate school at the University of New Mexico, got another graduate degree, and once I finished, then began a hunt for a job. Finally got employed by an organization in Albuquerque by the name of American Indian Management Institute. This was in August of 1973, and I've been working with tribes through different organizations ever since. So I'm now finishing up my 47th year working for tribal organizations throughout the United States. I'm divorced. My ex-wife is from Isleta Pueblo. I have 2 daughters and 2 granddaughters, all of whom are enrolled in Isleta. My oldest daughter lives outside of Seattle. She is a stay-at-home mom who is homeschooling my 2 granddaughters, who are 7 and 8. And my youngest daughter is a senior director, excuse me, for a hospital in Chicago, where she currently has 25 COVID-19 patients, and she is in charge of several departments, including emergency management. As I indicated, Bill Helmich Associates has been in business now since January of 1989. We're located, as you can see, in Sandia Park, New Mexico, which, as we say, is on the green side of the Sandia Mountains. That means the side that has timber. The Albuquerque side is the brown side. Okay, so let us go ahead and get started here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use some of the questions that I was submitted before the live streaming started, and I have a couple, 3 questions that deal with federal property management that several individuals have asked me to address. One of the first questions had to do with property records, and in order to respond to that, what I want to do is have you look at one of the documents that is called the OMB Super Circular, which I'm going to pull up on screen. I'm going to turn to a paragraph 200.33 first. 200.33 is the definition of equipment. And the first thing, well, that marker didn't work. Equipment has a life greater than 1 year and a purchase cost of more than $5,000. Now, by definition, what this then means is that that item is considered a capital asset. And that requires that the tribe maintain property records on that item. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to turn you now, excuse me, to another paragraph in the property management section, and underneath this section, you hold on a second here, there is a section dealing with property records. And one of the questions that was posed to me concerns property records and what requirements are imposed upon the tribe for those property records. One of the things that you have to do is to maintain property records on all of your capital assets. And unfortunately, when the Super Circular came out, one of the consequences of this was that it required that you go back in time to all capital assets that you still currently have. So, property records on capital assets is regardless of purchase date. So what this entails for you is that you have to go back and reconstruct records on assets that you may have acquired 20, 30, 40 years ago. If you still have that asset, you have to have that record, regardless of when you purchased it. Now, because one of the things that happens is that when you acquired that asset, you may have changed software, you may have changed accounting systems, but one of the requirements that you have is that you must maintain records on property items as long as you still possess that item. So let me turn to another requirement here in the law dealing with property records. Hold on, I'll pull that requirement up. Okay, retention of records. And you'll notice here under paragraph 200.333, records for property must be retained for 3 years after final disposal. So this record, you must keep the record until 3 years after disposal. So, imagine the situation where you bought an item. Let's say you bought a piece of heavy equipment, a backhoe, 30 years ago. 30 years ago, that would be 1990. You still have that item. You're still using that item. And now you decide this year you're going to get rid of it. And as a result of that, you decided that you're going to dispose of it. That would mean then that you would have to keep that record on that backhoe from 1990, when you acquired it, to 2023, 3 years after you get rid of it this year. Meaning you still have the record and you have to maintain that record even though you bought it back in 1990. So records retention for capital assets is a long-term requirement. Now, what this is going to entail for you is that you're going to need to perhaps go back and reconstruct records on all of the capital assets that you've identified in your property inventory. So, you do an inventory every 2 years. You go back and you say, okay, now I need to know information about that item. Now, you look here under 200.333, paragraph, the very first paragraph. You need to have, on that item, you need to have information about who the funding source was. You need to have information about the title to that item. You need to have information about what the award that you received that or you acquired that item under. So you need all of these detailed property records about an item that you acquired 30 years ago, which you may not have now. So therefore you're going to have to reconstruct that record before you can do the disposal, because there are constraints in law as to how you would do that disposal. So the first question that we had was about property records retention, property records content. And the appropriate law here is, in this case, 2 CFR 200.2 or 333. Excuse me. Okay, that was the first issue that we had. Okay, we have a question from some of the participants.
This is from Velma in Sandia District. Does this include solar panels or generators?
If you go back, Velma, thank you for your question. If you go back to the definitions that I had earlier, which was paragraph 200.33, 2 CFR 200.33. Now, that paragraph says, and I'm going to use it in the context of your question, did that asset that you acquired, i.e. the solar panel, is it projected to have a lifetime longer than 1 year? Obviously, yes, that's your intention. Was the cost of that solar panel in aggregate greater than $5,000? If so, that means that that asset is considered a capital asset, and that yes, you would have to maintain that property record for the life of that asset plus 3 years after you dispose of it, which hopefully for that solar panel system is going to be a fairly long time, which is the intent of that kind of acquisition. So records retention for this becomes a long-term requirement. This is the only record aside from OSHA records that has a long-term records retention requirement. Thank you for your question, Velma. Okay, now, the next question that was posed to me, and I'm going to put it up on the board, I'm going to go back to 200.333. And one of the issues that's raised under that paragraph, property records, let me pull up that paragraph citation again here. Takes just a little bit to scroll through it. 21, 24. Okay. Paragraph 200.333. Now, one of the issues that's raised underneath that paragraph is that you must maintain records about the title to that property item. Now, title will be owned by the tribe, but there are some idiosyncrasies here in reference to that title. So I want to put up some notes up on the whiteboard here about property title. As I do this, I'm going to make notation up on the whiteboard here, and you have links for all of the regulations that I'm going to cite on your screen when you subscribed in. Okay, title depends on source of dollars. I'm going to give you an example and to illustrate my point here. I'm going to buy 3 police cars with 3 different pots of money. And because I'm doing it with 3 different pots of money, it's going to change the type of title. They're going to be tribal title, but you have to keep track of the type of title. Now, suppose you use tribal dollars. If so, you have what's called tribal fee simple title. This is what you should record in your property records if you use tribal money. Now, because tribes receive money from a variety of federal sources, you also have the possibility of buying that piece of equipment with federal money as well. Now, let's suppose we bought the tribal police car with BIA $638. Now, in this case, the regulations are going to be 25 CFR Part 900. And in this case, you have a tribal title called conditional reversionary. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up a link for you here for BIA regs. In this case, 25 CFR Part 900, and I'm going to go down to property donation, and in this case, government furnished property. And you'll notice under paragraph 900.93, which is at the top of your screen, under paragraph 900.93, the federal government has the right to reacquire title for that item. And that's why I used the word reversionary, because by law, the federal government, under a 638 contract, could reacquire title. Now, I have another question that was asked earlier from the Bureau of Reclamation, which I'm going to respond to here in a moment. But before I do that, I want to put up one more type of title. Suppose the tribe, and I've got two different types so far. Suppose the tribe uses a Department of Justice COPS grant, DOJ COPS grant. In this case, we still have tribal title, but it's no longer, or is not, reversionary. It is conditional, which means that you are subject to CFR 200. Now, what this is going to do is to establish criteria for records management, criteria for use, criteria for maintenance, criteria for disposal. That's what the term conditional means for you. So go back now to property records. The question was asked, what kind of records must we maintain? Not only do you have to have records that you have to retain, but the records for title have to indicate the type of title. So, let's say we bought 3 police cars. They all look exactly alike. They're all Dodge Chargers. One was with tribal money, one with BIA money, one with DOJ money. The only thing different about these 3 vehicles is their VIN number. So when you go to the property record, in the property record you would have the VIN number, but under title you would have different types of title that would show that it was acquired with different kinds of money. And in the property record, not only would you show the type of title, but you would also excuse me, identify the source of funding. So you would stipulate tribal money, BIA money, or DOJ money. And that record, when it came time to do the disposal, would be able to be recovered, and you could track it according to the VIN number. Okay. If you now go to paragraph that I had up on the screen, 200.93, a question was asked of me about disposal of property when the item was acquired with 638 funds, and what could happen to that. As I mentioned to you, tribes acquire title. So all of them that I had up on the board here, those were all tribal title. However, if it was acquired with 638 money, there's a potential for the government to take title back. Excuse me. Now, notice here it says if the contract is retroceded, reassumed, terminated, or expires. That gives the government an opportunity, if the contract is retroceded, let's say. And one of the tribes, they did retrocede their police contract. If that were to happen, that would mean then that the police vehicles that were acquired with 638 money, the government could take them back. If the item was acquired with grant money, i.e. the DOJ COPS grant, the BIA, even under the retroceded contract, could not take that DOJ car back, nor could they take the one that was acquired by tribal money, tribal general fund money. The only vehicle that the BIA could take title back would be that which was acquired with 638 funds. So, to respond to the concern by the Bureau of Reclamation, if a contract expires, is retroceded, or is terminated, the government does have the ability to reacquire title. If the asset, however, goes under a fair market value of $5,000, that right of reacquisition no longer exists. So I want to go back to the super circular, and I want to turn to property management. Excuse me. And if you look here under paragraph, I'm in the wrong section. Property, here we are. Okay, now for property disposal, property management, where it says disposition, paragraph on disposition. I had a couple of questions about property disposal. So let me address that. All of these issues about property all kind of go together. So, equipment disposal. Per 2 CFR 200, and you can see on your screen there, let me scroll down just a little bit, 313. Okay. Now, the key issue that you're facing here for property disposal, the first thing you have to do is determine fair market value. Now, a point of clarification here. Fair market value is not. So you may have an asset that you acquired some time ago, let's say 10 years, you acquired a vehicle, your accounting records have depreciated that vehicle to zero. That is not the fair market value. And disposal is not dependent upon depreciated value, it's dependent upon fair market value. So, some matter, somehow or another, you need to make that determination. It may necessitate that you have to have an appraisal, or you can go to indices or references, such as, for example, for vehicles, you can use Kelley Blue Book as a means of determining the fair market value. Once you made that determination, then the disposal of the item depends upon what that value is. And there are two zones, if you will. There's going to be at disposal. It can be less than 5,000 fair market value, or it can be greater than. Fair market value. Now, that's the cutoff point for that disposal, is $5,000. If it's less than $5,000, as you can see on the paragraph here under disposal or disposition, then, excuse me, you have no obligation to the funding agency whatsoever. That means that in that case, if you sold the item, let's say you have an auction and you sold the vehicle for $3,000, fair market value was around that number, $3,500, $2,800, something like that, and you managed to get $3,000 for that item. You have no further obligation to the funding agency. You can keep that money, you can put it back into the program, you can put it into the general fund, you can do whatever you want with it. Theoretically, you could even use it to pay for costs which would normally be considered to be unallowable. However, if the fair market value is over 5,000, then everything changes. Now you have an obligation to the funding agency. And step number one, you basically have to ask the fundor for instructions as to what they would like to see you do for that disposal. So let's suppose you pose a question to the funding agency about that disposal, and they instruct you to sell it and put the funds back into the program. Then that's what you have to do. They could say, and it has happened, where they would instruct you to give the asset back to them, which is also a possibility. Another possibility is they can say, send the item to another organization, and that has actually happened as well. So, whatever their instructions are would be what you would have to follow. Now, let's suppose you ask them and they do not respond. If no answer, then the rule is sell and give the dollars to the feds. In other words, what the federal government has said is that they have a equity interest in that asset, and that equity interest continues up through and subsequent to the disposal of the item. So you can see under the disposition regulations here, the threshold 5,000 and under, 5,000 and over. And the results or the consequences are solely dependent upon what that fair market value is. Now there is a potential situation that could occur. If you were to find out what the fair market value is, and let's say we'll say hypothetically it's fair market value 6,000. You put it up for auction and nobody bids an amount in excess of 5,000. And the highest auction bid is 4,500. In which case the fair market value is realistically under 5,000 and you have no further obligation. Conversely, let's say you have an appraisal or a fair market value assessment of 4,800, so you put it up for auction and the bid is 5,200. Now the consumer or the person who acquired the item has indicated that the fair market value is actually greater than 5,000, in which case you would now have an obligation to the funding agency that's indicated by the realistic fair market value of 5,200, which makes it have to be given to the funding source. Those were some of the questions that occurred prior to the live streaming today in reference to property records, property title, and property disposal. Okay, I had a couple of other questions that happened prior to. I have one question that is in reference to the cost standards, and I think I was going to go ahead and answer that one, and then if you have any more questions, please put them in the chat box. The other question that I had is in reference to the applicability of the cost standards. And I want to bring up something in reference to the 638 regs. There's a citation in 25 CFR Part 900 under Financial Management Standards, paragraph number 900.45. And you notice in the picture on your screen there, it says type of tribal organization, and it says tribal governments, and on the right hand side of the screen it says A87. Okay, I want to put some notes up on the whiteboard here because you've had a change in law. So, per (25) CFR 900 OMB Circular A87 applies. Now, I'm going to pull up 2 CFR 200, and I'm going to turn to paragraph number, hold on a second, let me go to that doc reg. So we go to the correct one. Paragraph number 200.104. Now you notice paragraph number 104 is called supersession. And what happened in 2013 and effective December 26th of 2014, the new super circular took effect. And what this did, per 2 CFR 200.104 A87 was superseded. Now, what that means is that this document no longer exists, and it was replaced by 2 CFR 200 subpart E. And you no longer can utilize the information found in A87 as your guidance for cost allowability. You've got to go to 2 CFR 200 subpart E, and that's your new cost standards applicability. Okay, we've reached a point. Do we have any more questions from the audience out there? Okay, I would like to say thank you to all of you that have tuned in, and I hope that the information that we provided has been of benefit. If we're going to do another live stream next week, we will keep you informed. We will send out a email announcement about the topic that we will be presenting, and you'll notice that on this live stream at the subscription page there was links to all of the applicable laws that I felt may be of importance to you. You can click on those links and download those regulations for your files. Thank you very much. This is Bill Helmich signing out. What did you have, John? A total of 4?